You're trespassing on HOA managed property. I'm calling the police." That's what she said to me while standing on the ranch my family has owned for 3 generations. I had just driven 400 miles from my mother's hospital bed, still wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago, exhaustion carved into every line of my face. I pull up to the gate of my family's 40-acre ranch, and there's a new padlock on the chain. A sign I've never seen before reads, "HOA managed property," and a woman in a pressed linen blazer is already dialing 911. "Officer, a trespasser is refusing to leave community property." She doesn't even look at me when she says it, just keeps her eyes on her phone, like I'm not worth acknowledging. I reach into my glove compartment and pull out the original deed, the one my grandfather filed in 1952, decades before her precious subdivision even existed. She kept smiling, confident, certain that the sirens growing louder in the distance were coming to drag me away in handcuffs. She had no idea that the folder sitting on my passenger seat contained everything I needed to dissolve her entire HOA before the sun went down. What would you do if someone tried to steal your family's land while you were caring for your dying mother? Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know. Let me back up and tell you how this satisfying mess started. My name is Rachel Dawson, and Dawson Ranch has been in my family since my grandfather first broke ground on this Texas dirt. The first thing I noticed was the padlock. It hung from the gate where my grandfather's old chain used to be, a shiny brass thing that looked brand new, completely out of place on the weathered wooden posts my father had installed 30 years ago. I sat in my truck, engine idling, trying to process what I was seeing. If you've ever come home to find your world rearranged without your permission, you know the feeling. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is about what happens when someone tries to take everything you have while you're not looking. I had been gone for 4 months caring for my mother after her stroke in New Mexico. I had left Dawson Ranch in the care of my neighbor Deborah, who promised to check on the horses and make sure nothing caught fire. She hadn't answered my last 3 calls. I had blamed the spotty cell service in the valley, but now I wasn't so sure. The sign was the second thing I noticed standing just inside the gate, printed on what looked like regular office paper and laminated against the weather. HOA managed property, Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association, unauthorized entry, prohibited. I read it 3 times. There was no official seal, no registration number, just a logo that looked like it had been designed in a free graphics program. A smaller notice was stapled below, property reclassified under County Code Section 47.3, abandoned agricultural land, annexation provision. I had never heard of such a provision. I filed both details away without understanding why they mattered. The woman appeared from behind my own barn like she had been waiting for me. She was maybe 60 years old, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a linen blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her expression was the particular kind of pleasant that people use when they're about to do something deeply unpleasant. "Can I help you?" she called out, walking toward the gate with the confident stride of someone who believed they owned everything they could see. I told her I was Rachel Dawson and that she was standing on my property. Her smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. This property was declared abandoned under the County Agricultural Code and incorporated into the HOA jurisdiction through proper administrative channels. Do you have documentation proving current residency?" I told her my family had owned this land since 1952, that I had been away caring for my sick mother, and that 4 months of absence did not constitute abandonment under any law I knew. The woman tilted her head like I was a child making up stories. "I'm Janet Evans, president of the Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association. Our records show this property was flagged for code violations, overgrown vegetation, structural deterioration, and failure to maintain agricultural use. The county approved our annexation petition 3 months ago." She pulled out her phone with smooth efficiency. "If you're claiming to be the former owner, you'll need to take that up with our legal counsel. In the meantime, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll be forced to call the authorities." I didn't leave. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out the folder I always kept there, the original deed. The title transfers through 2 generations, and my current property tax receipts. I held them up so she could see the county seal, the signatures, the unbroken chain of ownership stretching back 7 decades. Janet Evans glanced at the papers with dismissive contempt. Then she dialed. Yes, I need to report a trespasser at the property on Miller Road, the one under HOA management. There's a woman here claiming ownership and refusing to leave. She paused. Yes. Deputy Wright usually passes through around this time on his afternoon patrol. I'll flag him down if he comes by before dispatch sends someone. She knew the deputy's schedule. She had done this before. I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the neighboring property, an older woman watching the confrontation with a troubled expression. Deborah. She didn't wave or call out, just stood there, arms crossed, like someone witnessing something she didn't approve of, but felt powerless to stop. Janet noticed me looking, and her smile tightened. That's Mrs. Phillips. I'm sure she'll confirm that this property has been under HOA management for months. The distant wail of sirens began to echo across the valley faster than I expected, but Janet had been right about the patrol route. Her smile widened into something triumphant. I suggest you wait right there, Ms. Dawson. The officers will want to speak with you about trespassing on community property. I stood on the land my grandfather had cleared with his own hands, holding documentation that proved my ownership, while a woman who had never swung a hammer or mended a fence prepared to have me arrested. The county code she cited didn't sound real. If that annexation petition existed, it would have required my signature unless someone had signed for me, and the sign behind her, with its cheap lamination and homemade logo, looked nothing like any official government notice I had ever seen. Something was deeply wrong with this picture, but the sirens were getting closer, and Janet Evans stood between me and my home, certain that the law was on her side. She had no idea that her certainty was built on a foundation of paper that I was about to tear apart, piece by piece. Deputy Randy Wright was a man in his early 40s with a sunburned face and the cautious demeanor of someone who had learned that domestic disputes were more dangerous than they appeared. He stepped out of his patrol car, hand resting loosely on his belt, and looked from me to Janet Evans and back again with the expression of someone who already regretted being here. Ma'am, I received a call about a trespasser. Janet's smile returned to full brightness. Yes, Deputy, this woman claims to own the property, but as I explained, it was incorporated into HOA jurisdiction 3 months ago through proper county procedures. She's refusing to leave. The deputy looked at the laminated sign, then at me, then at the folder I was still holding. You have documentation proving ownership. I handed him everything: the deed, the title transfers, my property tax receipts from 6 months ago showing I had paid in full. He studied them carefully, flipping through pages, comparing dates, his brow furrowing deeper with each document. Janet stood beside him, radiating impatience. Deputy, those papers are clearly outdated. The county approved our annexation petition. This property is under HOA management now. Randy Wright looked at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Ma'am, these documents show continuous ownership going back to 1952. The property taxes are current. He handed the folder back to me. I guess you can't arrest someone for trespassing on land they appear to legally own. Janet's smile flickered for the first time. Appear to own, deputy. I have bylaws. I have the annexation resolution. I have... Then this is a civil matter, he interrupted, his tone shifting to the flat professionalism of someone closing a conversation. Sorted out through the county recorder's office. I'm not equipped to adjudicate land disputes. He turned to me with something that might have been sympathy. Ms. Dawson, get a lawyer and visit the recorder's office on Monday. If there's a conflict in the records, they'll clarify. He glanced at Janet. Ma'am, I'd advise against further action until this is resolved. Changing locks on disputed property creates liability. Janet's expression hardened, but she said nothing as Deputy Wright returned to his cruiser and drove away. We stood in silence, the dust from his tires settling slowly in the afternoon heat. Then Janet smiled again, a different smile this time, one that didn't bother pretending to be pleasant. This isn't over, Ms. Dawson. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I spent that night in my own house for the first time in 4 months. The lock Janet had installed on the gate was easy enough to cut. I kept bolt cutters in my truck for fence repairs. The house smelled stale and empty, but nothing appeared damaged or disturbed. I checked every room, half expecting to find evidence that someone had been living here, but there was only dust and the faint mustiness of a building left unoccupied too long. I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, running through everything Janet had said. County Code Section 47.3, abandoned agricultural land annexation provision. An annexation petition was approved 3 months ago. None of it made sense. You couldn't just take someone's land because they went to care for a sick parent. There had to be procedures, notifications, my signature on something. The violation notices started arriving on Monday morning. The first one was waiting in my mailbox when I went to check for accumulated mail, a formal-looking document on letterhead that read Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association, with a logo that looked slightly more polished than the gate sign but still lacked any official county markings. The paper was thick, expensive, and designed to feel authoritative in your hands. Notice of violation: unpermitted structure barn in violation of community architectural standards. Fine $500, due within 14 days. I stared at the notice, trying to understand. The barn had been standing since 1968. My father had built it with his own hands. There was nothing unpermitted about a structure that predated the HOA by decades. The second notice arrived on Tuesday. The third is on Wednesday, by Friday. I had a stack of 7, and there was something deeply unsettling about the weight of them. The way they fanned across my kitchen table, like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed. $2,300 in fines, each one citing rules that couldn't possibly apply to a property that had never been part of any homeowners association. I noticed something on the fourth notice that made me pause. The document referenced HOA bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, but the fine structure it described didn't match the violation. The numbers were wrong. I pulled out all 7 notices and spread them across my kitchen table, comparing them line by line. The formatting was inconsistent. The citation numbers didn't follow any logical sequence, and not a single notice had an official registration number or county seal, just that logo and Janet Evans's signature at the bottom. These weren't legitimate legal documents. They were intimidation tactics printed on expensive paper, but proving that would require access to records I didn't have and expertise I wasn't sure I possessed. The letter from the HOA's lawyer arrived Saturday, a Houston firm with an impressive letterhead and aggressive language. Failure to remit payment within 14 days will result in the placement of a lien on the property. Continued residence without HOA authorization may result in additional legal action, including but not limited to eviction proceedings. My hands went still on the paper. The words blurred and sharpened, as if my eyes were refusing to believe what they were seeing. I didn't have $2,300. I didn't have a lawyer, and I didn't have anyone to call except Deborah, who still wasn't answering her phone. Her silence had shifted from strange to ominous. The county recorder's office wouldn't open until Monday. Until then, I was alone with a stack of threatening papers and a growing certainty that Janet Evans had done this before, to someone else, and had learned exactly how much pressure it took to make a person break. Monday morning. I drove to the county recorder's office with a folder full of violation notices and a head full of questions. The building was a squat brick structure on the edge of town, the kind of government office that hadn't been renovated since the 1970s. I took a number, sat in a plastic chair, and waited 45 minutes to speak with someone who could help me understand how a homeowners association could claim jurisdiction over land my family had owned for 7 decades. The clerk who finally called my number was a woman named Denise Ortega, mid-30s, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of person who looked like she actually read the documents that crossed her desk. I explained my situation as calmly as I could: the sign on my gate, the violation notices, the annexation claim, the lawyer's letter threatening a lien. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more puzzled with each detail. County Code Section 47.3, she repeated slowly, typing something into her computer. Abandoned agricultural land annexation provision. She frowned at the screen. I've worked here for 8 years, and I've never heard of that provision. She typed some more, clicked through several screens, then shook her head. There's no such code in our system. Whatever they told you, it doesn't correspond to any county regulation I can find. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Not surprise, exactly, but confirmation. Janet Evans had cited a law that didn't exist. She had built her entire claim on a foundation of invented authority. Denise looked at me with an expression that had shifted from puzzled to concerned. You said they filed an annexation petition 3 months ago. Let me search for that. She typed the name of the HOA into the system and waited. The screen loaded slowly, old government computers running on outdated software. When the results appeared, Denise's frown deepened. That's strange. I'm finding a filing for Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association, but it's categorized under commercial business licenses, not residential associations, and the formation date. She trailed off, clicking through to another screen. The documents show a formation date of March 15th, 2 years ago, but the filing timestamp in our system is from January of this year, 3 months before you say they started claiming jurisdiction over your property. She looked at me. Someone filed paperwork claiming the HOA was formed 2 years ago, but they filed it this year. That's either a clerical error or deliberate backdating. I asked her if she could pull the original formation documents, the articles of incorporation, the founding member signatures, whatever paperwork was required to legally establish a homeowners association in Texas. Denise nodded, but her expression remained troubled. I can request those from archives, but it might take a few days. Some of our older files were misfiled during a system migration last year. I'll call you as soon as I locate them. She took my phone number and wrote something on a sticky note that she attached to her monitor. Ms. Dawson, I'm not supposed to give legal advice, but what you're describing doesn't sound like a legitimate HOA operation. You might want to consult with a property attorney before this goes any further. I thanked her and left the office with more questions than answers, but also with the first concrete evidence that something was deeply wrong with Janet Evans's paper empire. The environmental complaint was waiting for me when I got home. A county inspector had left a notice on my door. Anonymous report of hazardous waste storage and potential groundwater contamination. Inspection scheduled for Wednesday at 1000 hours. Failure to permit access may result in additional citations. I stood on my porch, reading the notice, feeling the walls close in another inch. This was an escalation. Janet had lost the first round with the police. So, she was opening new fronts, environmental violations, health hazards, anything that would bring more officials to my property, more paperwork, more pressure. I wondered how many other landowners she had worn down this way. How many had simply given up and walked away rather than fight a battle on a dozen different fronts. Wednesday morning, the environmental inspector arrived exactly on time, a tired-looking man in his 50s who introduced himself as Frank and immediately apologized for the inconvenience. Anonymous complaints, he said, shaking his head. We have to follow up on all of them, even the ones that smell like neighbor disputes. He walked the property for 2 hours, checking the barn, the old equipment shed, the septic system, and the area near the creek where the complaint had alleged chemical dumping. He found nothing. Your property is cleaner than most farms I inspect, he told me, signing off on his report. No violations. I'll file this as unfounded. He paused at his truck, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know, we've gotten 3 anonymous complaints about properties in this area in the last 6 months. All of them are unfounded. All of them from the same phone number. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. That evening, I finally heard from Deborah. Not a phone call. A handwritten note slipped under my door sometime while I was in the barn feeding the horses. Rachel, I'm sorry I haven't called. Janet has been watching everyone who talks to you. She threatened to file complaints against my property if I contacted you. But there's something you need to know. I never signed any HOA formation documents. My name is on their list of founding members, but I never agreed to join. I think my signature was forged. Meet me at the diner on Route 12 tomorrow at 7 in the morning. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. D. I read the note 3 times, my heart pounding. Deborah hadn't been ignoring me. She had been silenced, threatened into compliance by the same woman who was trying to take my land. And if her signature had been forged, how many others had been forged? 2. How many of those 52 founding members had never actually signed anything? My phone rang just as the sun was setting. It was Denise Ortega from the county recorder's office. Ms. Dawson, I found the formation documents you asked about, but there's a problem. Her voice was careful, measured, like someone choosing their words very precisely. The file was misfiled, buried in a batch of commercial filings from 3 years ago, even though the HOA was supposedly formed 2 years ago. And when I looked at the signature pages, she paused. I can't say anything definitive without a formal investigation. But I think you should come back to the office tomorrow. There's something you need to see for yourself." I asked her what she meant. The line was quiet for a long moment. The founding date on the documents doesn't match the notary stamp. "Ms. Dawson, I've been doing this job for 8 years. Documents don't backdate themselves." I met Deborah at the diner on Route 12 at 7 in the morning, just as her note had instructed. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth at the back, with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, like she was trying to absorb its warmth. She looked older than I remembered, tired, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that made her glance toward the door every few seconds. When she saw me, relief and fear flickered across her face in equal measure. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure you'd still trust me after I didn't answer your calls." I told her I understood. She shook her head. "You don't, not yet, but you will." Deborah had lived next to Dawson Ranch for 15 years. She had been my father's friend, had brought casseroles when my grandmother died, and had promised to watch over the property when I left to care for my mother. She had kept that promise for the first 2 months, checking the horses, making sure the pipes didn't freeze, keeping an eye on things. Then Janet Evans had shown up at her door with a folder full of papers and a smile full of teeth. "She told me there was a new homeowners association for the Valley properties," Deborah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said everyone was joining, that it would improve property values, that there would be community services and shared maintenance costs. She asked me to sign a petition to show support." Deborah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. I told her I needed to think about it. I never signed anything, but 2 weeks later, my name was on their list of founding members. I asked her if she was certain. Maybe she had signed something without realizing what it was, a clipboard at a community event, a petition that looked like something else. Deborah shook her head firmly. "I know my own signature, Rachel. I've been signing legal documents for 50 years. What's on their papers isn't my handwriting. It's close enough to fool someone who isn't looking carefully, but it's not mine." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. "I went to the county recorder's office last month, before Janet started watching me. I asked for a copy of the HOA formation documents. Look at this." She slid the photo across the table. It showed a signature page with her name on it, Deborah J. Phillips, written in neat cursive. Next to it, she had placed a copy of her actual signature from a recent bank statement. The differences were subtle but unmistakable: the slant of the letters, the way she crossed her T's, the flourish at the end of her last name. Someone forged my signature, and I'm betting I'm not the only one. She told me about the others, 3 neighbors who had also expressed doubts about the HOA, but found their names on the founding member list anyway. 2 of them had moved away since then, worn down by violation notices and legal threats. The third was a man named Harold Vance, a retired notary public who lived on the far side of the valley. "Harold is the one who first noticed the forgeries," Deborah said. "He spent 40 years verifying signatures for a living. When he saw the formation documents, he knew immediately that something was wrong, but when he tried to file a complaint with the county, his paperwork kept getting lost, misfiled. They told him, system errors." She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "Janet has connections, Rachel. She knows people at the county office, not everyone, but enough to make things difficult. That's why Denise Ortega is so important. She's new enough that Janet hasn't gotten to her yet." I spent the rest of that day tracking down Harold Vance. His property was a small farmhouse at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by pecan trees and the rusted remains of old farming equipment. He was 82 years old, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, with the careful precision of someone who had spent his career scrutinizing details that other people overlooked. When I explained who I was and why I was there, he invited me inside and poured me a glass of iced tea without asking if I wanted one. "Deborah told me you might come," he said, settling into a worn armchair. "She also told me Janet Evans has been trying to steal your ranch. I'm not surprised. She tried the same thing with the Henderson property a few years ago, and the Martinez family before that. They both gave up eventually, sold their land for half what it was worth just to make the harassment stop." Harold had documentation, years of it, copies of HOA filings with inconsistent dates. Signature comparisons show clear evidence of forgery. A timeline of complaints that had been filed and then mysteriously disappeared from county records. "I've been building this case for 3 years, he said, spreading papers across his kitchen table. but I'm an old man with no money for lawyers and no standing to file a formal complaint. The county won't investigate unless someone with direct harm comes forward. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too many people give up. You have standing, Ms. Dawson. They're trying to take your property. If you're willing to fight, I'll give you everything I have. I told him I was willing. He nodded slowly, something that might have been hope flickering behind his careful expression. Then we need to work fast. Janet knows you've been asking questions. She'll escalate before you can build a case against her. He was right. By the time I got home that evening, the escalation had already begun. Someone had posted on the Valley's community forum. I heard about it from 3 different people who called to ask if the accusations were true. The post described me as a squatter who was illegally occupying community property and threatening the safety of Pinewood Valley residents. It included photographs of my truck parked on my own land, my horses in my own pasture, my barn that my father had built with his own hands, all presented as evidence of unauthorized habitation. The comments were brutal. People I had never met were calling me a criminal, a con artist, a danger to their children. Someone suggested that concerned citizens should take action if the authorities wouldn't. By midnight, the post had been shared dozens of times, and my phone had stopped ringing because everyone I knew had stopped calling. I sat alone in my dark kitchen, surrounded by Harold's documents and Deborah's photographs and 7 violation notices that I now knew were built on forgery and fraud. The community thought I was a criminal. Janet Evans had turned my neighbors into a weapon against me, and somewhere in this mess of papers and lies was the evidence I needed to prove that everything she had built was a house of cards. I picked up the photograph of Deborah's forged signature and held it next to the others Harold had given me. 3 signatures, 3 forgeries, and according to Janet's own documents, 49 more founding members might never have signed anything at all. Tomorrow, I will start finding them. Tonight, I would let myself feel the weight of what I was up against, and then I would set it aside and get to work. I arrived at the county recorder's office before it opened, waiting in my truck with a thermos of coffee and Harold Vance's folder of documents on the seat beside me. Denise Ortega had asked me to come early, before the office got busy, before anyone else could see what she had found. The morning sun was just cresting the hills when she pulled into the parking lot and waved for me to follow her inside. She didn't say anything until we were in a back room with the door closed and the blinds drawn. Then she spread a stack of papers across the table and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts vindication and disbelief. "Miss Dawson, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I thought I'd seen every kind of paperwork error possible, but I've never seen anything like this." The first document she showed me was the Articles of Incorporation for the Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association. It looked official at first glance, proper formatting, legal language, a notary seal at the bottom, but Denise pointed to the dates. The document claims the HOA was formed on March 15th, 2 years ago. The notary stamp is dated December 3rd, 3 years ago. She let that sink in. A notary can't certify a document before it exists. This was backdated. The revelation hit like the first crack in a dam. I had suspected fraud. Now I was looking at proof. But Denise was already pulling up her computer screen, and I could tell from her expression that the notary stamp was only the beginning. Every legitimate HOA in Texas has to file with the Secretary of State's office, she continued, turning the monitor toward me. Without that filing, the organization has no legal standing to enforce covenants, collect dues, or place liens. She clicked through to a search result. The words "no results found" filled the screen. Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association does not exist in the state database. They never filed, they never registered. As far as Texas is concerned, this HOA is not a legal entity. The dam cracked wider. Every violation notice, every fine, every threat issued by an organization that didn't legally exist, but it was the signature pages that shattered it completely. Denise laid out a grid on the table, 2 columns, 17 rows. The HOA claims 52 founding members. I've verified 17 signatures so far against public records. She pointed to the left column. These are from the HOA documents. Then the right. These are verified authentic samples, voter registrations, property deeds, bank cards. She didn't need to explain what I was seeing. The handwriting in each row didn't match. not close misses that could be explained by different pens or different moods, fundamental differences in letter formation that no single person could produce. All 17 are forgeries, Denise said quietly. Texas Property Code requires 67% approval to form a mandatory HOA. 17 forgeries mean they never had a quorum. The HOA was never legally formed. I asked her what this meant in practical terms. Void ab initio, she said. Void from the beginning. Every action they have taken has no legal force. They've been operating as a criminal enterprise. She pulled out one more document, internal meeting minutes. There's also no record of Janet Evans being elected president. She appointed herself during the founding meeting, a meeting that may never have actually occurred. The evidence was overwhelming. The question now was what to do with it. Denise was already reaching for her phone. The county attorney's office handles fraud involving forged government documents. I've already spoken with Linda Rivera. She handles property disputes. She wants to see everything. She paused. Linda's been tracking complaints about aggressive HOA tactics in this area for 2 years. 3 families have come to her with similar stories, but none of them had enough documentation to build a case. You do. That afternoon, I sat in Linda Rivera's office with Denise, Harold, and Deborah. Linda reviewed everything methodically, Harold's documentation, Denise's findings, Deborah's signature comparison, and my stack of violation notices. She asked careful questions and took notes. When she finished, she set down her pen. What you've shown me constitutes prima facie evidence of multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, filing false documents, potentially extortion. If the harassment was designed to force property sales, she paused. I can file a motion to have the HOA declared legally void, but there's a faster way, one that would expose Janet Evans publicly and prevent her from starting over with a new organization. I asked what she meant. Linda's expression remained neutral, but something sharpened in her eyes. Janet Evans operates under the assumption that she has institutional authority. If we challenge her privately, she'll fight it in court for months. But if we challenge her publicly, in front of the community she claims to represent, with all the evidence laid out. She let the sentence hang. People who build empires on paper don't survive when the paper is proven worthless. I thought about the forum post calling me a squatter. The neighbors who stopped returning my calls. Janet was standing on my grandfather's land, smiling as she called the police. How do we make that happen? Linda smiled, thin and precise. Leave that to me. Janet Evans has scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday to address the ongoing trespasser situation. She just invited the county attorney's office to witness her own destruction. Linda Rivera's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Janet Evans had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday afternoon to address what she called the ongoing trespasser situation and threats to community safety. She had sent notices to every property owner in the valley, demanding attendance and warning that failure to participate may result in forfeiture of voting rights. It was exactly the kind of overreach that had allowed her to maintain control for so long, manufacturing urgency, creating fear, positioning herself as the only solution to problems she had invented. But this time, she had made a critical mistake. By calling a public meeting to discuss my illegal occupation of my own property, she had created the perfect venue for her own exposure. All we had to do was show up with the truth. The preparation took 3 days. Linda coordinated with the sheriff's office, briefing Deputy Randy Wright and his supervisor on the situation. We're not asking you to take sides, she explained during a meeting at her office on Wednesday. We're asking you to be present in case things escalate, and to be prepared to act if criminal activity is confirmed in your presence. The sheriff's department agreed to have 2 deputies stationed outside the community center during the meeting, close enough to respond if needed, far enough to avoid the appearance of intimidation. Linda also arranged for a court reporter to attend, ensuring that everything said during the meeting would be officially documented. Janet Evans wouldn't be able to deny her own words later. Harold Vance and I spent Thursday organizing the evidence into a presentation that even the most skeptical observer couldn't dismiss. We created side-by-side comparisons of the forged signatures, each one paired with a verified, authentic sample from public records. We assembled a timeline showing how the HOA's formation documents had been backdated, how the county filings had been manipulated, and how the pattern of harassment had escalated against anyone who questioned Janet's authority. Denise Ortega provided certified copies of the missing state registration, or rather, proof that no registration had ever been filed. By Thursday evening, we had a folder containing 47 pages of documented fraud, organized chronologically and cross-referenced for easy verification. If Janet tried to claim ignorance or shift blame, we would have answers ready. Deborah Phillips reached out to other property owners she suspected had been victimized. Of the 17 forged signatures we had confirmed, she was able to contact 11 of the original property owners. 8 of them agreed to attend Saturday's meeting and testify that they had never signed any HOA formation documents. 3 others had already sold their properties and moved away, but 2 of them provided written statements that Deborah had notarized at the county clerk's office. I never joined any homeowners association. One statement read, "I was told my signature was required for a community safety survey. I did not know I was being listed as a founding member of an organization I had never heard of." The pattern was clear. Janet had collected signatures under pretenses, forged the ones she couldn't obtain, and built her entire empire on a foundation of deception. Friday evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the land my grandfather had cleared 7 decades ago. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another. Either Janet Evans would be exposed and her fraudulent organization dissolved, or she would find some way to twist the narrative again, to turn the community against me even more completely than she already had. I had spent 2 weeks being called a squatter, a trespasser, a threat to public safety. I had watched neighbors I had known my entire life cross the street to avoid me. I had received anonymous letters suggesting I leave before something bad happens. The weight of all that hostility pressed down on me like a physical force, and for a moment, I wondered if it was worth it if I should just sell the ranch, take whatever money I could get, and start over somewhere else. Then I thought about my father, who had built the barn with his own hands. My grandmother, whose ashes were scattered in the meadow behind the house. My grandfather, who had worked this land until his body gave out, who had told me stories about the early years when there was nothing here but dirt and dreams and the stubborn belief that something good could grow from hard work. They had given me this place. They had trusted me to protect it. And Janet Evans, a woman who had never swung a hammer or mended a fence or buried a family member in Texas soil, thought she could take it from me with forged papers and fake authority. The anger that rose in my chest wasn't hot and reckless. It was cold and focused. The kind of anger that clarifies rather than clouds. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight. And I was going to win. Saturday morning, I drove to the community center with Harold in the passenger seat and our evidence folder in the back seat. Deborah was already there, standing near the entrance with the 8 witnesses she had recruited. Linda Rivera arrived 10 minutes later, accompanied by the court reporter and a young assistant carrying a box of additional documents. Deputy Wright and another officer were parked across the street, visible but not intrusive. The community center parking lot was already filling with cars. Janet had done an effective job of drumming up attendance for what she believed would be my public humiliation. I counted at least 40 vehicles, which meant most of the valley's property owners had come to watch the show. They had no idea what they were actually about to witness. Janet Evans arrived last, driving a white sedan that she parked in the spot marked HOA President, a spot she had apparently designated for herself. She stepped out wearing a navy blue dress and a string of pearls, looking every inch the respectable community leader she pretended to be. When she saw me standing near the entrance, her smile flickered for just a moment before settling into its familiar, pleasant mask. "Ms. Dawson," she said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "I'm surprised you had the nerve to show your face here, but I suppose you should witness the community's decision about your illegal occupation." I didn't respond. I just held her gaze until she looked away, and then I followed her inside to watch her world collapse. The community center was a low brick building that had served as the valley's gathering place for decades. Potluck dinners, holiday celebrations, the occasional town hall meeting about road maintenance or water rights. Today, folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a long table at the front, where Janet Evans sat with 2 other people I didn't recognize. A banner hung on the wall behind them. Pinewood Valley HOA Building Community Together. The irony was almost too perfect. I took a seat in the back row with Harold, Deborah, and our witnesses. Linda Rivera sat near the front, her court reporter positioned at a small desk to the side. The room filled quickly 43 people by my count, most of them watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Janet had done her work well. These people believed I was the enemy. Janet called the meeting to order at exactly 2 o'clock, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, we're facing a serious threat to our community, an individual who has been illegally occupying property that was incorporated into HOA jurisdiction months ago. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the audience before settling on me. Ms. Dawson has refused to comply with community standards, refused to pay assessed fines, and has been spreading malicious lies about this organization and its leadership. Today, we will vote on appropriate action to protect Pinewood Valley from further disruption. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Janet smiled the same pleasant, confident smile I had seen on the day she called the police on me for standing on my own land. Linda Rivera raised her hand. Janet's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, I don't believe I recognize you. Are you a property owner in the valley? Linda stood, her posture calm and professional. My name is Linda Rivera. I'm the Assistant County Attorney for Property Disputes. I'm here in an official capacity to observe this meeting and, if necessary, to address certain legal matters that have come to my attention. The murmur in the room shifted confusion now, and something that might have been concern. Janet's composure flickered for just a moment before she recovered. I wasn't aware the county attorney's office had any interest in our community affairs, but of course, you are welcome to observe. We have nothing to hide. I'm glad to hear that, Linda said, because I have some questions about the legal foundation of this organization. She opened her folder and pulled out the first document. Mrs. Evans, can you confirm that the Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association was formed on March 15th, 2 years ago, as stated in your articles of incorporation? Janet nodded, her smile now fixed in place like a mask. That's correct. We have all the proper documentation on file. Linda held up the articles of incorporation. This document bears a notary stamp dated December 3rd, 3 years ago, 15 months before the date of formation. It claims to certify. Can you explain how a notary certified a document before that document existed? The room went silent. Janet's smile vanished. There must be some clerical error. The notary probably used the wrong stamp. Linda didn't blink. I've contacted the notary in question. She has no record of ever certifying this document. Her stamp was reported stolen 4 years ago. She pulled out another paper. I also checked with the Texas Secretary of State's office. Every legitimate HOA in this state is required to register. Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association has no registration on file. As far as the state of Texas is concerned, this organization does not legally exist. The murmur in the crowd had become a rumble. People were looking at Janet with expressions that had shifted from supportive to uncertain. A man in the third row stood up. Janet, what is she talking about? You told us everything was properly filed. Janet's voice rose, an edge of desperation creeping in. This is a procedural technicality. The registration was delayed due to administrative backlogs. It doesn't change the validity of our community agreements. Linda turned to face the audience. I'd like to call some witnesses to address those community agreements. She nodded to Deborah, who stood and walked to the front of the room. My name is Deborah Phillips. I've lived in this valley for 15 years. According to HOA records, I'm listed as one of 52 founding members who signed the formation petition. She held up 2 pieces of paper. This is the signature on the HOA document that supposedly belongs to me. This is my actual signature from my bank records. They don't match. I never signed anything authorizing the formation of this organization. My signature was forged, one by one. The other witnesses stood and gave similar testimony. 8 people, each holding evidence that their signatures had been faked. 2 written statements from former residents who had moved away, read aloud by Linda. The room grew quieter with each testimony. The hostile energy draining away and being replaced by something else: shock, betrayal, the slow dawning of realization. When the last witness finished, Linda turned back to Janet. Mrs. Evans, Texas Property Code requires 67% approval from eligible property owners to form a mandatory HOA. We have confirmed that at least 17 of the 52 signatures on your formation petition are forgeries. Even if every other signature were legitimate, you never had the legal quorum required to establish this organization. Janet stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a scream. This is a coordinated attack. These people are lying to protect a squatter who's trying to steal community property. Her voice had lost all pretense of composure. I built this organization from nothing. I spent years creating order in this valley, establishing standards, protecting property values. Everything I did was for this community. Linda's voice remained calm. Mrs. Evans, did you personally collect the signatures on the formation petition? Janet's face was flushed, her hands trembling. Someone had to do it. No one else was willing to step up and take responsibility. And when property owners refused to sign, Linda continued, what did you do? The question hung in the air. Janet's mouth opened and closed. The room was utterly silent. I did what was necessary, Janet finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Some people don't understand what's good for them. They needed guidance. I provided it. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. Linda nodded slowly. Let the record show that Mrs. Evans has just admitted to forging signatures on legal documents, a Class A misdemeanor, under Texas Penal Code Section 32.21. She turned to face the crowd. Based on the evidence presented today, I am officially declaring the Pinewood Valley Homeowners Association to be void ab initio, void from the beginning. This organization has no legal standing. All fines, assessments, and liens issued under its authority are null and void. Any property owner who has paid fees to this organization may file for restitution through my office. Deputy Randy Wright entered through the side door. His partner closed behind. He walked to the front of the room and stopped in front of Janet Evans, who had gone pale beneath her careful makeup. Mrs. Evans, the statements you made today, combined with the documentary evidence provided to my office, constitute probable cause for charges of forgery, fraud, and filing false documents with a government office. He didn't reach for his handcuffs, not yet, but his meaning was clear. I'd strongly advise you to retain legal counsel before answering any further questions. Janet looked around the room at the neighbors she had manipulated, the community she had terrorized, the empire she had built on lies. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the violation notices, the threats, the forum posts calling me a squatter, the 4 months of harassment designed to steal my family's land. The moment passed. I stood and walked to the front of the room, past the stunned faces of people who had believed I was their enemy. I stopped in front of Janet Evans and met her eyes. My family has owned Dawson Ranch since 1952. 3 generations have worked that land, built on it, been buried on it. You tried to take it from me with fake papers and invented authority. I kept my voice steady, controlled, and clear enough for the court reporter to capture every word. You failed, and now everyone knows exactly who you are. The charges against Janet Evans were filed the following Monday: forgery, fraud, and filing false documents with a government office Class A misdemeanors that carried potential fines and jail time. Her husband, Billy, posted bail, and she was released within hours, but the damage to her reputation was irreversible. By Tuesday, the community forum that had once called me a squatter was filled with posts from neighbors apologizing for believing Janet's lies, sharing their own experiences of harassment, and wondering aloud how they had been fooled for so long. The woman who had ruled Pinewood Valley through fear and fabricated authority couldn't walk into the grocery store without people turning away. Some called it justice. I called it consequences, the natural result of building a life on lies. Linda Rivera's office processed the dissolution paperwork within 2 weeks. Every fine issued by the fake HOA was officially voided. Every lien threat was nullified. Property owners who had paid fees received information about filing for restitution. Deborah told me that at least 12 families were pursuing claims, years of dues and assessments paid to an organization that had never legally existed. The total amount was staggering. Janet and Billy Evans would be dealing with civil suits for years to come, on top of the criminal proceedings. Harold Vance, who had spent 3 years building a case that no one would hear, finally saw his documentation put to use. He told me it was the most satisfying thing that had happened to him since retirement. The apologies came slowly at first, then in a flood. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid me now stopped by with casseroles and awkward explanations. Some I forgave easily, they had been manipulated, fed lies by someone they trusted. Others I forgave with more difficulty, remembering the anonymous letters and the hostile stares, but I forgave them all eventually. Holding on to anger would only poison the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. On a quiet evening 3 weeks after the meeting, I sat on my porch watching the sunset over Dawson Ranch. The land stretched out before me, 40 acres of Texas dirt that my grandfather had bought in 1952, that my father had worked until his hands were calloused, that my grandmother had loved until her last breath. No one would ever try to take it from me again, not with forged papers, not with fake authority, not with lies dressed up as community standards. Some things couldn't be stolen by people who had never earned them. Some things belonged to the families who had bled for them. This land was mine, and now everyone knew it.